Hey guys, it is Chris with Nichols Retirement Empire. I'm doing a video in the series Why Teachers Quit. I haven't done one of those in a long time. The reason I'm doing it is because I had something come to mind recently. I was sent a subpoena in the mail to appear in a court case for an issue that happened probably 4 years before I retired, and it involved a student or a drug offense that happened when they were in high school. Now I got tons of those. That's nothing, special. I had gotten a lot of those when I was an administrator. I got them all the time. I have in my garage a box that is full of all of the notebooks that I kept notes on of every conversation I had with a parent on the phone, going all the way back to probably 2010. I have all these records, all this stuff where I wrote down and documented what people said to me, or what I said to teachers, or what I said to parents. You're like, Chris, why do you have to have all that stuff? And I could still end up going to trial for something that had happened years and years ago. And the reason for that is something called liability. The percentage of teachers that don't make it to retirement is off the chart now, which is a shame because it is a very good retirement and with good benefits, and you would think people would want to stay in teaching long enough to get their retirement and get those benefits that they have earned. But more and more they do not. And it's because of things like liability. When I was teaching, before I became an administrator, I had a teacher that was next door to me in the hall where we taught social studies, and me and him would look at each other every morning, and we would, and this is no lie, we would look at each other every morning and we'd say, hey, what's our motto? We would go, don't sue me. What's our motto? And it's a shame that people that were getting ready to teach kids had to look at each other every morning and remind each other, don't get sued. We're liable for that. We are legally responsible for their children being there. And so since we are legally responsible for them being there, we are legally responsible for the children. Liability for children is much greater than it is, in some other fields, because they're kids and you're an adult. Back when I started in the 80s, the threshold of liability was very high, but it's not like it is now, because the thing about laws is that you have these bodies of every state has these lawmaking bodies, and what they do is they make laws, and they keep making laws. They don't take laws away hardly ever. They just keep adding more and more laws. And so the more laws you have, the more liability you have. And guess what? One of their favorite areas to add laws to is education and laws for the protection of children and things like that. So you keep getting more and more things that you're responsible for. 30 years ago, the idea that we would be feeding students that were not at school would be just, would be crazy. And today, schools in a lot of places in the United States routinely, they're feeding kids on the weekends. They're feeding kids during the summer. They're feeding kids, when the pandemic is going on, all that stuff. And so the liability just gets greater and greater and greater. And when I was an administrator, always on my mind was a liability all the time. You were liable for the safety of the school. Does everybody know how to get out in a tornado drill? Does everybody know what to do if there's a bomb threat? Does everybody know what to do if there's a student with a gun? Does everybody? And what happens is now they want to sue the schools all the time. If I could tell you how many times I got threatened with a lawsuit, you just wouldn't believe it. But the thing about it is that never bothered me, because as long as I was doing my job, it's called good faith. If I'm doing my job in good faith, then you can't sue me, regardless of what happened, because I was doing legally what I was supposed to do. And I always made sure that I was. If I was negligent, if I was on purpose trying to hurt a student or trying to do, then yes, I could be charged or I could be sued or something like that. But as long as I was doing my job, I was okay. But it's like that for a reason. we wouldn't have any schools. If people got to sue schools for the things they wanted to sue them for, there wouldn't be any education, because they want to sue for, you got my daughter's grade wrong. You hurt my daughter's feelings. You suspended my son out of school, and he didn't really do what you said he did. And now you can't sue schools for stuff like that, because they're just doing what they do. They're doing what a school does. If a student did something and they do an investigation and they say he deserves to be suspended, he gets suspended. You can't sue him for that. The news doesn't do a good job of explaining that, because all the news does is they report things that parents claim the schools did, and they don't get any explanation from the school about what happened. They just go by what the parent said, because the school's never going to respond, because the school doesn't want to talk about children to reporters. They can't talk about what they did to children. They can't talk about what children did. They can't talk about the parents. The parents could talk about it all day long and say, these other students did this to my son. The other students did this to my daughter. The other student, this, here's a video. They can do that all day long, but the school can't do that, because they are guardians, basically, of those other children. Parents would want me to tell them all the time what I did, discipline-wise to another student. Like, two kids got in a fight, and I suspended their son out of school. What'd you do to the other kid? I can't tell you what I did to the other kid. Why not? Because that's not your child. I can only talk about your child and what I did to your child. Well, it better be, they'd get all upset. I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about the other child. And that was liability reasons why I couldn't do that. And they'd want to sue me, and they couldn't. But that's the kind of thing that people just can't comprehend. They want you to tell the other students' names. They want you to tell you the parents of the others, and you can't do any of those things. It's so aggravating. You couldn't say things like, a kid, gets in trouble because he gets into an argument with another student, and, you call the parent up and you say, hey, your son, is going to be put in school suspension because he was arguing with another student, and they'd get all mad. What'd you do to the other student? I want to know about the other student. And I couldn't say, hey, they are autistic, and your son kept bothering them, and then they screamed at him, and he screamed back, and they ended up. I couldn't say your son was being ugly to an autistic student. Or you would have a situation, there were two students and they got caught with drugs. The special ed student would have to have a hearing to determine whether or not their offense had to do with their disability, whether their disability caused the student to do what got them in trouble. And if it was, then you couldn't put them in an alternative school or suspend them out of school. And so you would have one student where the process would go through and they would be suspended out of school that day and put in the alternative school within a few days, and it all went by. And then the other student that was special ed, you would be waiting for a week or two to have this hearing. In the meantime, they're going to school. Well, the other parent would call up and go, hey, why is my son in alternative school and this other guy's still going to school? I couldn't tell them, well, he's in special ed and we have to wait until we have a hearing. I could not even tell them that. And, you try to explain things like that to people. You can't explain that to people. And it's because of liability. I had to, every time I talked with somebody, if it was a teacher or a parent and something kind of wasn't right with it, I would have to stop and write down everything that I said, everything that they said, just in case they tried to come back and, sue me. If I had a female teacher come in my office, I would leave the door open because I didn't want to be accused of, saying something inappropriate, or being in a closed door, behind closed doors with some female teacher. I had to think like that constantly. And a lot of teachers that get in trouble, that get fired, they get fired because they're not cognizant of their liability. They get online and they do stuff online and they say things online that they shouldn't say, or they don't think about them being in a public eye and they do things they shouldn't do. And it's because of liability, or they let themselves get behind closed doors with a student, and the student claims they did something. We would spend just enormous amounts of time and pre-planning and all that kind of stuff, trying to explain to teachers and getting them to understand this is what you're liable for. And as an administrator, I would let you know straight up front, if you do something that's illegal, I'm not going to cover you. I'm not going to, defend you in front of the parent. I'm not going to defend you in front of some kind of hearing. I'm not going to defend you in front of the, if you did it and it's illegal, I'm telling exactly what happened. But yeah, they would want me to have their backs all the time, but they were doing something that they were liable for. Like if a teacher left a room and two students got in, did something and got in an argument or got in a fight or whatever, and then the teacher would come to me and they would want me, or they would want like the maximum punishment possible for those two students. And then I found out that the teacher was not even in the room. Then it made it difficult for me to do a maximum kind of punishment. And now the parents want to know, well, why was the teacher not even in the room when my son got in an argument? That should have been in there. If you don't understand liability and you can't be responsible enough as a person to take on that liability and be diligent with always doing what you are supposed to do, then education is not a good field for you to be in, because you're going to get in trouble. Is one of the reasons why a lot of people do not want to go into teaching, because they don't want that responsibility. And it's a situation where for the amount of money that they make, they have to think, is this worth where I could potentially lose my livelihood, lose everything I have, go to jail even, because I couldn't maintain my level of responsibility because I took this job and I put myself in this position. Now I've done something, I just out of ignorance did not understand, and I didn't do what I was supposed to do, and then something happened and now I'm responsible. They will not let you use that as an excuse. It's a very tough job with very little wiggle room if you do something wrong. It's not just a mistake where you didn't get somebody's order right at a restaurant. I mean, you put children in danger by your actions, in some cases. And a lot of people can't deal with it. And that's why a lot of people don't stay in teaching, because when they realize how much liability there is, they don't want a part of it. One of the things that's so frustrating as an educator, as an administrator, as a teacher, is that you have all this liability, all this responsibility, that you have to take accountability for, and the student has practically none. And I mean comparatively, like zero responsibility. And in the past, we used to really expect more from kids, and expect more from teenagers, and expect more, like you're kind of responsible for this, and you're responsible for your behavior and all that. And it's almost like we have taken all responsibility away from them, and all liability practically away from them. And not only that, but the parents are hardly liable as well. Very little liability, practically none, as far as in a school setting. And it is so aggravating that you can't expect that when a student walks into your school that they can behave a certain way or that they can act a certain way. It all becomes the school's responsibility and the school's liability that they take on. I have friends that are elementary school principals and things like that, and they will just flat out tell you that the last 10, 15 years that children are coming into kindergarten and children are coming into first grade that are, just have absolutely no concept whatsoever of anybody telling them what to do, of, being, following any kind of rule, any kind of order, any kind of, anything. They just run and hit people and fight the teachers and bite people, and they're old enough to where they shouldn't be doing those things. And they say it is amazing. I mean, they are getting beat up at work and hit and bit and all these things at work. And the kids have there's no consequence, to speak of. I mean, you can't put them in jail. They're little bitty kids, and it's just, so frustrating from the teachers and administrators. And that's part of the thing. It's not just how responsible they are. It's the fact that nobody else is responsible, and they get held completely responsible by everybody, by the press, by the politicians, by the parents, by everybody. Everybody wants to point a finger at the teacher and the administrators, and everything is on them. And that, should not be the case. Everybody should be. It's our children's education. It's our community's education. We all should want to, have a responsibility in it, but that's not the way it works now, apparently. So anyway, thought I would add a new chapter on to Why Teachers Quit for you guys. So have a good day.